I'm David Merritt.
And I'm Francine Lacqua.
And this is In the City, Bloomberg's podcast connecting you to the stories and the voices at the heart of the City of London.
Now this week, a conversation with Kevin Ellis, Chair and Senior Partner at PwC UK. Kevin joined PwC UK's Executive Board in 2008 to lead the advisory business.
And he previously spent the majority of his career in business restructuring. So Kevin, welcome and thank you for joining us on In the City.
Good morning. It's great to be with you. Thank you for inviting me.
So I guess hearing when you started back in 2008, of course, we all know what was going on with the economy then. We know what was happening with companies. We're now back in recession in Britain, and you've got a ringside seat again at PwC. I mean, how does it feel now compared to back in the big financial crisis?
Yeah, actually, I've been around a while, so I've seen a few recessions, even pre-2008. I think this is very different. I mean, 2008 was driven by the financial crisis. This is driven by a number of other factors, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's the reaction to positivity for so many years and low interest rates. I think the difference here, particularly for me, is it's virtually still full employment. Feels like that. It still feels a tight labour market. I know it's coming off slightly, but it's a challenging market to retain talent, and therefore I think when we think often of recessions, we think of unemployment and lives destroyed through unemployment. It's still going to be tough for households. It's still going to be tough for individuals. But I think the unemployment factor is going to be different. I think there's more employment this time around.
So, Kevin, first of all, what does this mean for businesses? I mean, PwC has a crucial role in advising and sometimes, I guess, restructuring or changing things around. How many businesses will go under?
I think, look, insolvency is a necessity of a market economy. And businesses go under for loads of different reasons. They could be the technology moves on and they become irrelevant, or there could be a financial crisis or debt. I think we've seen a huge length of time with very low levels of insolvency, partly because I think some of the bounce back loans, I think some of the funding for furlough payments and effectively low interest rates. So I think there is a catch up that will inevitably happen. The big query for me is whether the wall of money that's out there looking for investments will rescue the assets early enough, and therefore the benefits of the good bits of the businesses will get saved quicker. And I think we're probably better at doing that now.
Right, but if there is a catch-up, when is that wall going to hit? Is it going to be 2023? As you said, this recession we're in, we're not seeing massive job losses yet. Are things going to actually get worse before they get better?
Sadly, I fear they will. I think the sentiment is going to affect it. It does feel that the retail numbers and the October GDP, certainly in the UK, was probably better than everyone feared. But I think the other side of Christmas, there will be a catch-up and there will be business failures. I think that's inevitable. And again, having had such a long period without them, I think there is a natural catch-up. So I think it will happen, and I think it will happen in 23, but, that's a guesstimate.
But are these businesses that should not be going under, or is it businesses that actually have been propped up by cheap money for too long? So, are these failing businesses that just make no sense? Maybe that's harsh. Not no sense, but have they been propped up? Save me, Dave. How would you say it diplomatically?
Yeah, well, I mean, are these the zombie companies that are, the Walking Dead that need to be put out of their misery?
I think there are a number of companies that probably there will be a catch-up, and that probably without some of the support they've had and low interest rates, they might well have caught up earlier. And one of the challenges for the UK is our productivity challenge. And therefore, I think, failures of businesses that probably are in that kind of zombie category, as you put it, Dave, probably is a good thing from a productivity point, because then those scarce resources get reallocated to the growth areas.
Yeah, the productivity problem, and people talk about this a lot, economists, obviously, and analysts, and no one seems to know what the solution is. I mean, as you say, maybe weeding out some of these companies is part of the answer, but do you think the government has really got a plan for boosting productivity and getting the economy moving again? We know there was a big plan over the summer with Liz Truss's economic agenda, which blew up spectacularly. Do you think Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt have got the right set of proposals now?
Look, I think it's been a challenge not just for this government, but probably for the last decade. We've seen it in terms of the UK growth hasn't been where it would like it to be, and I'm sure this government have got plans that hopefully will make the difference. For me, I think as a business, a lot of it comes down to skills. I think, we are going through this fourth industrial revolution. We're all looking for more tech skills. And therefore, I think as business, you kind of can't wait for governments to solve it for you. You've got to find ways of making yourself more productive by getting those skills into your business. And that's really where we're focused. But again, I'm sure it's front of mind for the government. I'm sure it's front of mind for the new education secretary. And I'm sure it's front of mind as well for the opposition.
I mean, it could be front of mind, but it's not easy. So what are you seeing at companies right now? You do get the call and saying, we just don't have the skills. We are lacking the people that we need to hire. Or is it more of a restructuring financing problem?
Look, it's a combination. But I'd say if you go to the skills area, as a business, we've recruited 7,000 people this year. And what we've done is we've really focused on accessing apprentices, accessing experienced hires, but also the whole social mobility factor. For us, we need to have people that represent effectively the values, identities of our clients. So for us, we've found that working with schools, working with more challenged areas and across the country has been the answer to getting that talent in. I mean, this year we had 300,000 applicants to join us, probably 3 times the level of 5 years ago. So I think you've got to kind of plan early. These things, if you want the skills, you've got to make sure you're fishing in all the ponds, and you've got to do it over a long period of time.
I mean, you're obviously one of the premium employers, a great destination for aspiring professionals in Britain. You mentioned sentiment, though, and, recessions are about sentiment, aren't they? That people don't want to invest. They feel like you've just said it, 2023 is going to be a really gloomy year. Are you feeling that across corporate Britain now, that really people are just going to sit on their hands, they're not going to invest, they're not going to be hiring, and actually that's just going to make the whole situation worse?
No, I think people are still hiring, and there will always be pockets. I mean, again, in the tech space and a lot of businesses, there is still a lot of people needing talent. So we're seeing huge demand in the tech space and areas like that, digital skills. So I think people are still hiring. In terms of investment, I think you're right, it's sentiment driven. But again, if you go back to what we saw in 2020 after the pandemic struck and we all went into lockdown, is we came out of it much, much faster than anyone anticipated. If you like, we went into this kind of deals-led recovery boom period from the September. You couldn't see that coming in the March. So I think there is all that wall of money. There's whether it's in the hands of private equity, sovereign wealth or corporates. So I think the first signs of green shoots will get out of this recession quite quickly, but I think we will inevitably go into it.
I know, but there's problems with valuation. I mean, Dave and I talk about this every day. Like if you look at, a lot of the money, there probably needs to be a huge readjustment, and that will hurt a lot of companies.
Agreed. At the same time, everyone's looking around for the next unicorn. Everyone's looking around for the next brilliant idea. And I think if someone has the right idea, then there is money out there looking for a home, looking to be first into the market. So I think if I go back to the 90s, it took a lot longer to come out of recession. Now, I think because there isn't a lot of money there looking to invest and get the returns, they'll be back in the market quicker than they were out of previous recessions.
We also talk a lot on this podcast about the kind of relative attractiveness of London versus other financial capitals. Obviously, there's the Brexit angle. But I think with your perch running the UK business and thinking about that investment piece, London does do well on tech investment. It's doing well as a fintech centre. How do you rank London's attractiveness at the moment compared to the rising financial centres in Europe, Paris, Frankfurt, Dublin, Amsterdam, and of course more globally, Singapore, New York?
I think London is still a massive asset for the UK. Partly they've got the professions, he says, from a biased point of view, but I mean, it does make a difference. But also language, time zone, and effectively there is a positive vibe around tech. We published a Green Jobs survey that came out this week, and it's quite interesting that only San Francisco beats us in terms of climate tech. And again, it wouldn't be something you naturally associate with the UK, but again, London's at the heart of that. So I think London has a huge benefit for the UK.
Inflation's a worry. You have 25,000 staff in the UK. Do you have to pay them more?
Yeah, no, we had the biggest pay round probably in my time this summer. We thought we had to get ahead of it, and it went right down to graduates. So, it was double digit for our graduate intake. But again, if you're trying to make sure you're getting the best talent, you've got to do that. We also found with the energy crisis, we had to do something extra for our staff. So we made a special payment for everyone earning under £50,000 to help with their energy bills and help their families with their energy bills. But again, you kind of feel it's the right thing to do as a responsible employer.
Yeah, I mean, so you're not heeding the Bank of England's advice there, right? I mean,
wonder whether they've done a U-turn day.
wage restraint is not something that if you're running a big business like yours, we can do, right? And I think, if you're going to retain people, do you see that being another massive pay round next year? You're going to have to keep those level of inflation up?
I think we're seeing. I think we've made the adjustment kind of ahead of the inflation. So it'd be too early to start saying what we'll do next year. But what I would say is that inflation is starting to come off. We're hearing that. So I think we'll make the decision next year based on where we are in kind of May and June, because we do our pay round in the kind of end of June. But again, we're in a market for talent. You want to retain top talent, and therefore you've got to pay what the market demands.
Kevin, I love the idea of rock stars because, if you speak to a 12-year-old or a 16-year-old, it's probably like the real rock stars, the ones that go on stage and kind of perform in front of millions of people. For Dave and I, who are they, Dave? Central bankers? Who's your rock star?
CFOs?
CFOs? I mean, are they the new rock stars in companies, Kevin, because of all this financial engineering? And actually, leverage is such a huge concern. Is this what companies need?
I think the rock stars are the leaders that can inspire the next generation. And for me, I think it's also the innovators. I think, you talk about, the next unicorn, the tech talent. I think that's actually flattened hierarchy. So you've got the leaders who are used to kind of bringing people on and giving people a reason to come into work every day. But then also, I think technology is flattening that hierarchy. And some of the rock stars are kind of the younger members of staff that are able to kind of come up with a digital solution that effectively works for clients and works for business.
But there's also a really important role, isn't there, for, as you said, the professions, companies like PwC. I mean, we've just seen this in spectacular fashion with, thinking about rock stars again, Francine, with FTX, and just hearing some of the testimony there about the lack of any controls, any of the normal processes in a company to manage the financial side. And, going back to the CFOs, there's more need than ever, isn't there? In an environment where tech and startups are leading the economy, that you have the right, perhaps a bit more sober and professional advice.
I like this. It's boring now exciting, Dave.
Yeah, exactly. Well, exactly. That's my point, Francine. Do we need a little bit more boring when it comes to actually creating success?
Yeah, I think, look, when you've got innovation, it's really important to have the right governance around it and the right controls and transparency. So I think, whether you're talking about diversity and inclusion, whether you're talking about carbon, all of these things play to businesses like mine that independently keep score. And so, there will always be dramatic and spectacular collapses. And with hindsight, people will see that it wasn't done. But I think the importance of having the right governance and the right controls and transparency can never be overemphasized.
But every time we go through one of these huge blow-ups, Kevin, everyone says, well, how can a company grow that big and have so many investors pouring money into them without these proper processes in place? We don't seem to be able to create the regulatory framework whereby people have to use auditors in the right way, do we?
I don't know the detail of that particular company, but I think it will ever be thus. There will always be kind of high wire collapses, and then whatever happens, there'll be hindsight and learnings. I think that's just kind of how life works.
It's part of the ecosystem, is it?
It is part. I think it's part of the ecosystem. Therefore, I think it's really important that we don't underestimate the importance of governance and transparency.
But as debt rises overall, would you say that an auditor, unrelated to scandals, but that an auditor or a CFO is almost more important than the chief executive?
No, I think the chief executive is the person that runs the business, and he says that as someone that is effectively the chief executive. But
not biased at all.
Not biased at all. But no, so at the end of the day, the person that actually sets the strategy and effectively delivers the strategy is the board under the control of the chief executive. The auditor is effectively the third line of defence behind the non-execs. That are very, very important nonetheless because they're the independent voice. But at the end of the day, the strategy is executed by the board, and that's led by the chief executive.
As the chief executive, though, Kevin, what worries you most about your business and the broader economy coming year? We've talked about energy and inflation. You mentioned, the different reasons for the recession we're in. But what do you think are some of the biggest challenges you're going to face in 2023?
Right. Firstly, my business is really a people business, and therefore
everybody says that. Kevin.
Yeah, but it is, because at the end of the day, I don't have My assets go home and go down the lift at night and go home. So, and that's how we make money. And therefore, how they're impacted by the recession will impact my business and therefore will impact my profitability. So I think what really worries me at the moment is we are going to have a Christmas and New Year with headline after headline about inflation, strikes, negativity, energy costs and the like. That will have an impact on my workforce. So therefore, I think for me, it's about counteracting that negativity by reminding people about their jobs, their rewards, how they're led, how they're developing, all the positives, because I think you've got to you can never cocoon them from reality, but at the same time, I think you've got to remind them about their situation versus the wider market, because otherwise I think the problem is you're trying to manage against people being distracted by negativity.
So you're like a cheerleader to 25,000 employees in the UK.
Yeah, I think, cheerleader or kind of being transparent. I mean, I do regular town halls where I'll have 7, 8, 9,000 people listening online and some people hearing afterwards when I'll answer their questions. But I think, again, as a leader, there is more responsibility on me to be transparent and open and answer their questions than ever before.
What are your staff telling you about their fears then? Is it inflation? Is it wages? Do they see themselves building their careers at PwC? And also, how are you doing about getting them back to the office? And how important do you think that is in terms of building that cross-generational team feeling that you mentioned?
In January last year, if you look at the question bank, because I don't manage to answer every question, but say I had a question bank of 250, 300 questions, virtually 80% of the questions were about COVID. Now, we've all forgotten that now, but that was January. By the time you got to March, all the questions were about Ukraine. And our office in Ukraine, what's happening in Ukraine, what do they think Ukraine would do? And then everything since June has been about energy and energy costs and inflation. So you can kind of see that sentiment, we're like a barometer of sentiment. Your point about back to the office is really important, right? So 7,000 people joined our office this year. The only long-term competitive advantage of any business is its culture. So unless those 7,000 people come into the office, learn the culture, build their networks and learn through observation, and you get serendipitous innovation as well alongside that, then I'll have a disengaged 7,000. At the end of next year, probably half my workforce will be disengaged because they won't get the culture if they're not in the office. So we're being very clear. I want everyone in the office, kind of on average 2 to 3 days a week, averaging probably towards the 3 rather than the 2. I've been very open about that. And actually, a lot of the feedback from our staff is the same, because the junior staff want the senior staff in the office for whom they're going to learn from. So it's a big responsibility to encourage people back. It's not helped by the winter. It's not helped by the train strikes. There's always a reason. But again, from my point of view, I'm very clear with those that join us and all the staff that I want people in the office, ideally 3 days a week or more.
Some of the Wall Street banks have been a bit more hardline on this, haven't they? They've come out and said, actually, we want everyone in 5 days a week. Is that a sort of aspiration, or do you think that 3 is is the right balance to keep people motivated, engaged, and also to be able to continue to recruit? Because this is it can become a recruitment issue, this, can't it?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. So our business, if you like, before COVID, probably 10% of our people were at any one time working from home. So it has always been a flexible. We always say, effectively dress for your day and work at the hours that work for you, your clients and team. So we've always had that flexibility built in. And I think effectively the 3-day kind of target, if you like, is kind of reflecting how it's worked well during COVID and building up from the 10%. It probably would have got there anyway, but just would have taken longer to get to the 3-day a week. COVID accelerated that. But again, if you're not in 3 days a week, either in our office or on client site, then I think you will in the long term lose out on your careers. So I think being clear with people that if you want to progress in your careers, it does come down to skills learnt through observation and networks and building relationships with clients face to face.
Is there a danger that, and this is something that I've been told by a couple of quarters, is there a danger that it's especially women, right, that could lose out on promotions because they're dealing with maybe children? It's more, valuable for them to stay at home.
Yeah, now I've looked at the stats on that, and again, diversity inclusion is really important to us because again, it kind of is what our clients expect, and is more successful for us as a business. We haven't seen that as a factor in our business, maybe because our average age is younger, I don't know. But I think, again, you've got to be aware of all the factors. So again, we look at feedback as well as the data to see if there are any certain trends we should be aware of and try and counteract.
Yeah, one of the most popular podcasts we've done this year has actually been looking at the question of equality in the city, and particularly equal pay, and this big case that was taken against BNP Paribas. What is your view on how the city is doing and corporate Britain is doing on equal pay for men and women in the same jobs? We know there's been legislation to try and shine a light on it. How important is it, and how much of a problem do you still think we've got?
Yeah, it's still a big challenge. So we're part of the City of London Progress Together task force, which is about effectively that very issue. And I say it matters to us because if I look at the feedback from our clients, so we've got 26,000 clients, majority of them are small businesses. They choose their people that work with them. They choose their professional service advisors, partly by competence and brand, but also, and it comes through in the feedback all the time, those people sounded like us or they were like me. So you've got to have that diversity and inclusion to be economically successful. That has come across really strongly. One way you do that is in our recruitment. We do a digital annual report, and in that we share all of our pay gap information, our diversity and inclusion information, our black pay gap information, as well as our social mobility information. And that's the most read part of our digital annual report. And it shows you that people are looking to join a company where they will be able to progress whatever the colour of their skin, their gender or their background. And they're looking for that inclusivity, if you like, in the data before they join. So it becomes self-fulfilling. So, we've got a long way to go. Look, our pay gap, including partners, is 17.5%. But that's because effectively it's kind of a historic built in. We've got to change that. And therefore, Progress Together, which we're working on with the City of London, is really important to us as well, because unless we progress people from all different backgrounds and genders through the organisation, then we won't be as successful as we should be.
Have you ever lost an account or not gotten an account because the people pitching were not diverse enough? And is that the way? Is this the only thing that will make a real difference?
Do you know what? That probably won't come through in the failure feedback, but it comes through time and time again in the success feedback. So when you say, why did you choose us? Time and time again, it comes down to your team sounded like me, the gender worked, it was that kind of point. So, and that's really important because we're a partnership, right? So I'm appointed and elected by my partners. So if they think that pay gap and they think diversity is a nice to have, they won't buy into it. But when I give them that information and I show them the feedback and I explain that it's an economic necessity for future success, it actually pays their drawings and their bonuses, then it changes.
Do you think those sorts of incentives, Kevin, are enough? I mean, the government has done the pay gap legislation. Does there need to be more actual laws from the government to make pay and hiring more equal?
I think you've got to be careful. There's so much legislation out there. At the end of the day, we've got to make sure we are at the heart of it a meritocracy. So I think the pay gap and effectively flow rate. So all our promotions, we're checking that the flow rate and the promotions reflect what we would expect to see from our black employees, our female employees, and social mobility. So we look for that all the time in our flow rates and we publish it. I think that's enough. I think at the end of the day, there will be, I think, customers, i.e. clients, and future employees will judge you based on that. I think when you reduce it to kind of more and more legislation, I think it will take so long to do. I think the problem will have been even worse by then. So I think effectively there will be a kind of a commercial reason for doing it, and that should drive the change faster.
But progress is going at such a glacial pace. You must be frustrated.
I'm more positive about how fast and the benefit we've seen in our business. I think it's really interesting. People talk about social mobility, they talk about levelling up. There's an independent survey that's been going on now for about 10 years of social mobility employers. If you look at the top 10, 8 of them are professional services in the UK. 8 of them. And professional services by their very nature, because people join us and then leave somewhere else to go somewhere else, because that's how it works. Lawyers and accountants. So we're like a social mobility escalator. So I think, no one shouts about that, but I think actually the professions in this country are doing quite a lot on levelling up. And that is something that probably we should actually focus on more. There are a lot of levers out there that already exist, so we don't always need a shiny new one.
That's really interesting. And does that mean you're hiring more? Are you trying to push jobs outside of London?
65% of our kind of first-time joiners are outside London now. 50% of our employees are outside London. Our second biggest office now is Belfast, with 4,000 people, one of the biggest employers there. So you follow the talent. What I've noticed is that a lot of the talent finds London too expensive. So if you're a business trying to get talent, you've got to follow the talent. There's no point trying to bring the talent to London if he doesn't want to come.
Who doesn't want to come to London? Dave, I'm outraged.
If you can't afford to live, or you've got to go back and live with your parents, it's not very attractive.
Right.
Kevin, thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to this week's In the City. We'll be back next week.
But in the meantime, if you like our show, please head on over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts and rate, review and subscribe.
This episode was hosted by me, David Merritt.
And me, Francine Lacqua.
It was produced by Summer Sadi. And special thanks to Kevin Ellis.